Thank you very much for the great introduction. And it's a real pleasure for me to be here. It's actually the first time that I'm visiting UPenn, so I'm very excited about it. And today I'll speak to you about a robust human-robot interaction, equality, diversity approach. And so I'm an assistant professor at USC, where I direct the interactive and collaborative autonomous robotics systems, also known as Icaros lab. And when I started at USC, what I wanted to do is I wanted to find some way to help people. And so I went to a facility with post-stroke patients, and I asked them, if you have a robotic arm like the one depicted in the picture, what would you like the arm to help you do? And people said things like, I would like the arm to help me with eating, with meal preparation. But what really made an impression of me was a female patient, a lady. She told me that she would like the arm to help her comb her hair. And that's an important issue because it's not like something that one needs to do to survive, but it's an important self-image aspect. It has an important self-image aspect. And so then I thought, okay, what can we do to build a system to help people with hair combing? And so what we did was we started developing a system where we have a Kinect, and the Kinect builds a model of a person's hair, and then builds a mesh with a person's hairstyle. And so the robot then can follow a constrained path along a person's hairstyle to comb their hair. And different people will have different hairstyles. So what the robot needs to do is it needs to adapt to different hairstyles of different persons in order to effectively do the hair combing task. And we did this, we implemented this system in the lab, and we did a user study, and people were and it worked fairly robustly in the lab setting. But then we asked the question, what do we need to do to actually deploy the system in the real world? What do we need to do to have the system interact with users for a large amount of time? And what happens is that there are many undesirable behaviors that can occur that we should account for. So one such behavior is what happens when the user raises their arms. And therefore, the robot needs to be able to stop for safety, to not get in touch with, not get in contact with the user's skin. And so for this, we built a skin conductance sensor so that as soon as it detects contacts with the skin, the robot will stop. But actually, there are many, many undesirable behaviors that may occur that we should account for. And so the question becomes, how can we actually account for these undesirable behaviors? And one approach is through user studies. So I've built my entire career doing user studies. I think they are very, very essential in identifying different behaviors and also about understanding how users may behave. But when there is a limit in user studies on how many users we can have and how many environments we can create and test. So instead, what our thesis is that can we automatically generate scenarios in simulation and synthesize environments and user behaviors to test complex human-robot interaction systems. And so as an example, human-robot interaction system, we use the shared autonomy algorithm. So this is an algorithm developed by Shervin Javdani in the personal robotics lab at CMU. And the idea behind the shared autonomy algorithm is that the user provides some inputs through a joystick interface. The user has a goal in their mind, and the robot attempts to infer that goal from joystick inputs, which it treats as observation. So the robot runs a partially observable Markov decision process, a PAMDP, and then assists the user for their goal. And so this is an example success of the system where there are two goals, right? And there is the T object on the left, and the user provides inputs towards the object on the left. The robot observes the joystick inputs, infers the user's goal, and assists the user for the goal. And it's a very robust system. So I've tested this system extensively through my PhD studies. We actually went to Kinova Robotics in Canada, and we had patients with spinal cord injury use this system to pick up objects. It's a very robust system. And so the question we asked is, can we actually break the system? So can we generate scenarios in simulation that will make the system fail? Now, what do scenarios mean in this context? Well, the first part is joystick inputs. So can we synthesize joystick inputs? Can we simulate like user behavior? And the second is object location. So can we move objects around and see if we can find some sequence of user inputs or some specific configuration of objects that will make the shared autonomy system fail. Now, one approach to do that is to try to formulate this as a single objective optimization problem where you try to find the global optimum. And the result of that would be the maximally adversarial scenario, where the user, for example, consistently points the joystick in the wrong direction. So the user tries to be deceptive. But these scenarios in human-robot interaction are not very interesting, right? And they are easy to find. And instead, what we want to have is we want to have a diverse range of challenging scenarios. So we want to generate scenarios where the user is optimal, but also scenarios where the user is noisy. Scenarios where objects are close to each other, but also scenarios where objects are far away from each other. And so what we actually want to have is we want to find for a diverse range of high quality solutions. And so when I was trying to solve this problem, I found out that there is actually an entire community or sub-community that focuses on solving exactly the problem of finding a diverse range of solutions. And that's a quality diversity problem. And to give you some insight, in single objective optimization, you have one objective that you try to maximize or minimize, and you try to find a global optimum. In multi-objective optimization, you try to find a Pareto front between two or more objectives, let's say F1 and F2. Then there is diversity-driven search, where you do not care about objectives, but instead you have some measure functions, which is what you want to have diversity for, and you want to find the solution for every output combination of the measure functions. Now, quality diversity has both an objective and one or more measure functions. So you try to find a solution for each output combination of a measure function, say M1 or more measure functions, but you also want to maximize an objective F. And so formally, in quality diversity, we assume some objective, we assume some measure functions that form a measure space. And then what you want to do is you want to find for each output combination of the measure functions, you want to find a solution so that the objective is maximized. Now the measure space is continuous. And so this means that you would need infinite memory to cover that space. And so instead, what many quality diversity algorithms do is they tessellate the space. So they discretize the space, and then they assume that the space is partitioned to, let's say, M cells. And the goal then is to fill in as many cells as possible with solutions of as high quality as possible. And a state-of-the-art algorithm is map-elites, where map-elites maps a high-dimensional search space to a lower-dimensional measure space. And the idea is that you have some measure functions, you discretize that space, you have some cells that you want to fill, and you want to fill in as many cells as possible with solutions of as high quality as possible. And the way map-elites works is that it retains an archive of solutions. So it retains an archive of the best performers. So for each cell, it keeps the best performer found. And it generates new solutions iteratively, so that if a new solution is better than an existing solution in an occupied cell, then it will add that solution to the archive. If a new solution finds an empty cell that is unoccupied, then it will again add that solution to the archive. Otherwise, it will discard newly generated solutions. And so the way map-elites works is that it will first sample solutions through some fixed distribution. It will populate the archive. And then iteratively, it will select solutions from the archive. It will select the best performance. It will apply some perturbation. So specifically, it will perturb solutions with some isotropic Gaussian noise, generate new solutions, and then if they are better, they will add them on the archive. And the goal is to fill in the archive, but also like to find solutions of as high quality as possible. And the key insight behind map-elites is that existing solutions act as stepping stones, right? So if you have a high-performing solution in some part of the archive and you perturb that, there is a high probability that there will be some high-performing solution in some other part of the archive. That's the intuition behind this algorithm. And so we said, okay, can we apply map-elites and see if we can find some interesting scenarios that result in failures in the shared autonomy domain? And so what are the scenarios here? Well, we try to vary two things. One is distance between objects. Intuitively, the more cluttered the scene, the harder for the robot would be to pick up the right goal of the user. And the second is user rationality, how noise there is in users' inputs. So the noisier the user, the more likely the system to fail. So that would be the measures that we want to have diversity for. quality would be how challenging a scenario is, right? So the goal is to find system failures. And so this is a resulting archive of scenarios. So the y-axis is distance between objects. The x-axis is variation, so total amount of noise added in human inputs. And the cells are individual scenarios. The color indicates performance. So the red color is a maximum timeout, which means that the robot was unable to find a failure in the given timeout. So it's like a failure case, right? So the red color is failure case. And then x-axis is distance, y-axis is, no, y-axis is distance, x-axis is noise in human inputs. So let's first compare the performance of map elites with respect to some baselines. One is uniform sampling, where we uniformly sampling the scenario parameters. The other is with CMAS, which is a state-of-the-art derivative-free optimizer that tries to find the global optimum. Well, we first see that compared to CMAS, we cover a larger space of scenarios and also find more failures. And that's not very surprising because CMAS is a single objective optimizer, so it doesn't attempt to find diversity. What is interesting is that even for random search, for uniformly sampling the scenario parameters, we were able to find more scenarios. And the reason behind that is the following. In many domains, what happens is that when you uniformly sample a high dimensional search space, all the samples are concentrated in a small region of the lower dimensional measure space that you map into. And to give you an example, let's say that you place objects on a table, so that you place like bottles on a table, and you uniformly place objects, and you care about the distance between objects. Even though you uniformly place objects, the sample distances will actually be concentrated on a small region because the probability of all objects being maximally distant will be very small. And also the probability of all objects being very, very close to each other will be very small. And so you can actually prove from properties of random vectors that the sample distances will be concentrated on a small region. And this is just one example domain where uniform sampling is not a very effective method. And this is why map elites that actually uses existing solutions as stepping stones to evolve further solutions performs better. And there is actually a metric for that, which is a quality diversity score, which summarizes the quality and the diversity of all solutions found. So it's a sum of qualities of all solutions of all elites, of all high performing solutions in the archive. And we were able to, and this qualitative difference that you see in the archives, we can quantify it with the quality diversity score, and we were able to show that it actually map elites found more scenarios and more diverse scenarios. Now, the next question is, how do these failures look like? And so this is an example success case of map elites where, success case of shared autonomy where the user's goal is the left goal and the user points to the left and the robot infers by using the joystick inputs as observations that the user wants to go to the left goal. But let's see a failure case. Now, this is a failure case here that we will reproduce in the real world where there is noise in user inputs. So where the human is very, very noisy. And if you reproduce that, so what happens is that there is a small jerk towards the right side because of noise, and that confuses the system, right? And the system infers wrongly that the user wants to go to the white distractor object instead. But that's not very exciting. I mean, if the user is noisy and points to the wrong object, the system will get confused. What was really interesting is that we found failures even for an optimal user. So even for a user that there was very, very small amount of noise, the system still was unable to reach the user's goal. And let's see how this scenario looks like. And this is a case where the white distractor object is right in front of the goal object. And because the system uses a distance-based observation function, even though the user is nearly optimal, the system thinks that the user goes to the white object instead. And so this is an example failure case that when we tried testing the system, we were placing objects side by side because we knew exactly how the system works. But through this automatic scenario generation process, we were able to find a failure that was not discovered in previous works. And so this shows that quality diversity can actually result in scenarios that are previously unexplored. And it can perform better than uniform sampling as well as single objective optimization methods in covering a wide space of scenarios. Okay, so that's the work that we did, and we sent it to RSS, and it got accepted, and we were very happy about it. But reviewers pointed out two very legitimate concerns. And the first concern was that MapElite still requires a very large number of evaluations. So I don't know if any one of you has used OpenRave simulation environment, but we had actually 100 OpenRave instances running in parallel for several hours that required significant infrastructure work, and also it was a very time-consuming process. And so can we find scenarios more efficiently? And the second limitation is that the generated scenarios are still pretty simple. So we are still just moving objects around. So can we generate more complex scenes? And so in the next parts of the talk, I will speak about how we addressed each of these two limitations. So the first one is that MapElite still requires a large number of solutions. And how does MapElite work? So MapElite still generates some solutions from some fixed distribution, and then selects them uniformly, and then perturbs them with some isotropic Gaussian. This means that when we apply a perturbation, we assume that every direction is equally likely to generate the next successful solution. But can we do better? Can we do a little something more intelligent? So can we instead generate solutions that are in the direction of maximizing the quality diversity objective, where the quality diversity objective is to find solutions of as high quality as possible, but are also filling the archive with as many solutions as possible. So in fact, what we want to do is we want to somehow estimate a gradient of the quality diversity objective with respect to the current archive. Now, what does this mean? It means that we want to somehow estimate the direction of steepest ascent with respect to the quality diversity objective. So intuitively, we would like to find some small change on the archive that maximizes improvement. That's the definition of gradient ascent, of steepest ascent, right? And so what is a change of the archive? A change of the archive would be either to add a new solution or to change a specific solution and replace it with a better solution. And so the key insight is that we formulate this as an optimization problem where we search for a solution that maximizes archive improvement. And we solve this optimization problem using CMAS, covariance matrix adaptation evolution strategy, state-of-the-art optimizer. And the way CMAS works is that it samples a population of solutions and then selects and then ranks these solutions and selects them based on some objective. Here we generate solutions and we rank them based on how much they improve the archive. So we rank them based on archive improvement. And also CMAS has some very nice step size adaptation properties. And so the result of that is that we are moving in a direction that maximizes archive improvement. And by combining CMAS with MapElite, so by combining the archiving properties of MapElite with the selection and ranking properties of CMAS, we proposed covariance matrix adaptation MapElite, which we found that it performs much, much better than MapElite in some benchmark domains. To test MapElite, we use the test domain of Hearthstone. So Hearthstone is a very interesting test domain because you pick which move to make, but you also pick which card to have in your deck. So it's like playing chess, where you're not only choosing which strategy, but also which pieces to have on the board. And we used CMAME to search for good strategies. So here we don't search for scenarios. In this domain, we just search for good player strategies that win as many games as possible against a suite of opponents. So we represent the strategy as a neural network that ranks board states. And then we optimize the neural network parameters with CMAME, where the goal is to win as many games as possible. Now, the measures that we want to have diversity for is how long a game will last, so number of turns, but also how large the deck will be. So how many cards we'll have in our hand. And so you see how CMAME performs compared to MapElite. So you see that so higher color means lighter color means a larger number of wins. And we see that CMAME explores a larger part of the archive, but also wins more games. Now, what is interesting is how CMAME expands. So the x-axis is number of turns, so how long a game will last. And so the way CMAME works is that it first tries to find very quick solutions, so games that last very little, very short, and then wins these games, and then tries to find longer games and gradually optimizes the longer games. So it's learning how to play chess, where you first try fool's mate, but then you can get that far, and then you try to learn how to play longer games, and then eventually win these longer games.
How big is the state space?
Yeah, so the size of, so the state space is the weights of the neural network, and I believe is about 10,000 parameters. It's tens of thousands of parameters, of neural network parameters. So the state space, yeah, so the state space is very large because it's you can have up to 171 cards, and this can be arranged in sets of 30 cards per person. I don't recall the. I'll have to get back to you for the exact number, but I know it's a very, very large state space. It's 2 to the. I think the possible strategies is 2 to the 20 or 30. It's like a. But I'll have to get back to the exact number. Yeah. Now, what is interesting here is that the way we specified the measures actually help form a natural curriculum, because we have the hand size, right? The number of turns as a measure, and this indicates how long the game will last. And by trying to explore that space, by trying to fill in that space, what CMAME does is it first finds source solutions and then gradually starts to explore longer solutions and win these solutions. And we see that there is also a difference in the quality diversity score with respect when we compared CMAME with the baselines like MapElites and as well some other state-of-the-art quality diversity algorithms. Yes? Right, so what we do here is we use new revolution. So we have a randomly initialized neural network, and then we evolve the parameters of the neural network. So the search space are the weights, and then and these are the neural network ranks states, right? And then based on this ranking, we select what's the most promising deck. So it ranks deck, right? Deck sizes, and based on the ranking, we select what's the most promising deck, and then we evaluate that on a suite of opponents. Okay, so we talked about how to improve the efficiency of MapElites, which requires a large number of evaluations. The second aspect is that generated scenarios are pretty simple. So can we generate more complex scenes? And one way to add complexity on the scenes is to add more objects. And that will make a scene more complex, but it's not exactly what we want, because if we are to test human-robot interaction systems, then we would like environments to be not only complex, but also realistic. So we would like, for example, here, we would like the pot to be on top of the stove and the fruit basket to be on top of the table and not the other way around. And so the way to retain realism is through what we propose as latent space illumination, where we have generative models trained with human-authored examples, and then we optimize the latent space. So now the search space is the latent space of a generative model, and we search the latent space for diverse examples. And that results in a diverse and high quality content. And so we use, in this example, we use the overcooked game domain. And the idea behind this domain is that you have two agents and they need to coordinate to complete the task as fast as possible. So the green agent is a robot that runs a PAMDP, a simulated robot that runs a PAMDP and tries to infer what the other agent will do and adapt to that agent. The first agent is a simulated human that just runs based on a rule-based model, so based on some heuristics. And the two agents need to coordinate to complete the task. And now the question becomes, can we create environments that result in very diverse coordination behaviors, even though the two agents run exactly the same algorithms? The way to do that is we have a generative adversarial network, again, trained with human authored examples. And then we use CMAME to explore the latent space. And then we generate an environment from the GAN. And that environment matches the style of the human authored example. So it is realistic in that sense. But often it has artifacts, right? So for example, here you see that we have two agents of the same type. We see that some parts of the environment are blocked. And so the question is, can we repair this environment so that it's executable by the human robot team? And we formulate this as a mixed integer program where the objective is to minimize the number of edits while respecting some executability constraints. And so we cast this as a minimum cost network flow problem, where we find the closest layout that matches the input layout that is executable. So for example, like where everything is accessible, where you have this one human agent and one simulated robot agent and so on. And then we simulate the agents and we evaluate their coordination. So we evaluate concurrent motion and also human idle time. So we evaluate some metrics of fluency. We use this to update the archive, and we do this iteratively so that we fill in the archive with as many layouts as possible. And these are two example layouts. So on the layout on the left, you see that the two agents coordinate very, very well. So they act concurrently. There is very little human idle time. And so all pods are very easily accessible. So they complete the task very efficiently. While on the right layout, you see that first the two agents get confused on the crossing. And then also one agent then has to wait for the second agent. So here the one agent has to wait for the second agent to go grab the one part and then go pick up the onions. And this is an example of poor coordination. Even though the two agents run exactly the same algorithms, you see the qualitative difference in how the two agents coordinate that is solely based on how the environment was generated. And you see that this environment on the right is quite intuitive, like so there is a long corridor, but still these environments were completely automatically generated. Yes. Right. So the pipeline specifically is not tied up to the GAN. So people have actually used exactly the same framework also on a VAE, on a variational autoencoder. So here we use the GAN because we wanted the environments to be not only diverse, but also realistic. So we wanted the environments to match the style of human examples. So we did a baseline where instead of searching the latent space of a GAN, we directly searched for tiles in the layouts. And the environments were still diverse, but they looked nothing similar to the human authored examples. So this comes back to the original motivation that if you want to evaluate agents, ideally you want to evaluate them on environments that are realistic, right? That are what you would expect in a real world. Now, what is interesting also is that we can use exactly the same formalism to search for failure cases. So this is an example where the green agent runs a PAM-DP and gets stuck with a blue agent, which is a simulated human. And then the blue agent, because they got stuck based on this heuristic, the heuristic that we have, will take some random actions. But then this causes the green agent, the belief of the green agent, to oscillate between two subtasks, because the other agent will move back and forth. And so this is an example of a failure cases based on how the PAM-DP model was initially designed. And so we can actually use exactly the same formalism if we want to find diverse failure cases. Now, what is really interesting is that these findings that we had completely in simulation translated when we had real users interact with the system. So we had a user study where we replaced the simulated human with axial users, and we had different environments, some of them the low team fluency environments, these are environments that in simulation, the agents did not perform very well, did not coordinate well. And high team fluency environments where in simulation, the agents coordinated very, very well. And we had actually real users, and we observed that the amount of concurrent motion in the x-axis for the low team fluency environments was significantly lower than for the high team fluency environments. So you see that qualitatively, the differences in behaviors that we observed from simulating agents were similar to the behaviors that we observed from real humans interacting with a simulated agent. And so this shows that we can actually generate environments that have a very strong effect on the resulting coordination behaviors of the agents. Now, when I was working with the GANs, I started thinking, can we also expand this and generate video game levels? And in fact, before coming to the States, I worked in a video game company in Japan, and I worked on procedural content generation for games. And one thing that I quickly found out is that when we spend a lot of time carefully optimizing and designing a specific level or a specific motion, and then designers never used it, but instead that was an initial point for exploration. So designers wanted to have a wide range of content to explore and select from. And so we said, okay, can we use exactly the same pipeline to generate diverse video game levels? And so this is we did that for Mario. So we had a set of human authored examples that we used it to train a GAN. And then we had an AI agent, an A-star agent, play the GAN level and evaluate the level based on its playability. And then we said, instead of generating like one single level, can we generate levels that are diverse with respect to number of enemies and also number of sky tiles, number of tiles that are up in the sky. And so this is an example generated level when there is a large number of enemies and a small number of sky tiles. This is a large number of enemies and no sky tiles, or only ground tiles. This is small number of enemies, but only sky tiles. Oh, so the idea is the following. So there is a latent space exploration, and latent space exploration or latent space evolution. And what people have done with that is they have some specific objective, and then they have used the single objective optimizers like CMAS to optimize the latent space towards that objective. So that objective would be to find the most playable level.
The loss function on the latent.
Yes. Correct. There is a loss function with respect to some metric, and then you navigate a latent space to find some latent vector that minimizes that loss function. Illumination comes from, it's more like a quality diversity jargon. That means you don't just try to find a single objective, but you try to fill in an archive with diverse latent vectors, which means that you have some measures of diversity, and we want to find a collection of latent vectors that are diverse with respect to measures of interest, but also maximize a specific objective, which could be, here it is whether the level is playable or not. So it's essentially applying quality diversity algorithms to search the latent space of a generative model. Okay, and this is just a level generated in between, and just all these levels were automatically generated from latent space illumination, right? From exploring the latent space of the GAN. Okay, so that we discussed how we can integrate quality diversity algorithms with generative models to find more complex scenes. Now, I wanted to come back to the first part, which is that MapElite still requires a large number of evaluations, and can we make the search even more efficient? And all the algorithms that I have discussed so far treat the measures and the objective as black box, so they don't exploit any gradient information. But there are many applications where actually gradient information is available. And so we define the differentiable quality diversity problem where both the objective and measures are first order differentiable. So we have access to the exact gradients of the objective and measures. An example of that is the style GAN and clip pipeline. So the idea here is you have a latent vector and you pass this as input to a style GAN and you generate an image. And then you have a text prompt that is, let's say, Elon Musk with short hair. And then you pass this as inputs to a clip model, which is a model trained by OpenAI. And that will give you a score. And then what you can do is you can do gradient ascent to find images that are as close, that match the text prompt as much as possible, right? So that look like Elon Musk. But what if instead of doing that, we could generate instead diverse images? So images that look like Elon, but they are diverse with respect to hair color or eye color. And to do that, one way would be to specify as measure the similarity to a prompt blue eyes, and then we would not maximize that prompt, but we would find a set of solutions that explore a range that are diverse with respect to this prompt, to the similarity score to that prompt. Now, what is interesting is that here, the pipeline here is also end-to-end differentiable. So if we specify as measure the similarity score, what the output of clip between the text prompt and the image, that's also end-to-end differentiable. And we can also have the gradient information of that. And so this leads to us trying to find a solution for the differentiable quality diversity problem, where both the objective and measures are end-to-end differentiable. And that was actually an open problem posed several years ago. And we were able to solve that problem. And so in the next slides, I'll explain to you how we did solve what's the intuition behind solving this problem. And so in map-elites, what you do is you have a solution, and then you apply some isotropic perturbation where you assume every direction is equally likely. Can we leverage gradient information in map-elites to improve that solution? Yes. Yes. So definitely. So the idea behind quality diversity is the following. You have an objective F that you want to maximize. And then you are given a set of measure functions. And these are the functions that you want to have diversity for. And these functions form a measure space that you want to fill in. And then, so the goal here is that you want to cover that space. So you want to find solutions that cover the space, but are also as high quality as possible. Now, we don't try to solve this problem because we would need infinite memory because this space is continuous, the measure space. Instead, we discretize that space. That's most quality diversity algorithms do. So that we tessellate that space. So we partition that space to a set of cells. And we're trying to fill in as many cells as possible with solutions of as high quality as possible. So that's a general quality diversity problem statement. Now, differentiable quality diversity is a special case where the objective and measures are first order differentiable. So we assume that we have exact gradients of the objective and measures.
So in the constraint M of theta equals S,
Mm-hmm.
is this added as an objective, or is it an exact constraint like with the Lagrangian multiplier?
So let me think a little bit. So it's different than a single objective. So you can add it as part of the objective in that you can formulate this as a single objective in that you want the sum of so that you want to have a collection of solutions where the sum of the objective F over the collection of solutions that belong to, that are outputs of M is maximized. So you can formulate that as a single objective, but quality diversity algorithms don't try to transform the problem as a single objective optimization. Instead, what they try to do is they try to formulate the problem so that they try to solve for each cell, they try to find the best solution possible. So they kind of, I think they kind of decompose the problem to individual single objective optimization problems where you want to fill in a cell with a solution of as high quality as possible. But in terms of the total objective, the quality diversity objective, then you can formulate it as a sum of the quality of solutions over this measure space. Okay, so can we leverage gradient information in map-elites? So if we had the single objective, I think that will also, I think, help with the answer. So if we had a single objective, right, that we want to maximize, we could just do gradient ascent on that objective. But remember that in quality diversity, we have one single objective that we want to maximize, but we also have a set of measure functions that we want to cover. So that form a measure space that we want to cover. So there is also a measure space that we want to fill in. And so can we use gradient information to fill in the measure space? Now, let's say that we have two measure functions, M1 and M2. The gradient of M1 with respect to theta is a direction of steepest ascent of M1 with respect to theta. The gradient of M2 is the same. And the negative gradients are the directions of steepest descent. And so we see that the gradients here form some form of coordinate system. And then if we multiply the gradients with some coefficients, we can perform some type of motion in measure space. And so if we have a single objective that we want to maximize, then we can move in one direction and do gradient ascent. Here, because we want to cover the space, we want some type of branching tree structure. And so we want to have some type of tree where we branch based on the gradients, but there is still some directionality in search, in that we still have an objective that we want to maximize. So therefore, we borrow the term arborescence from graph theory that says that even though we are branched in order to cover the measure space, there is still a directed tree search in that we still move in the direction of maximizing the objective. And so the way to do that is we can define a function g that is a linear combination of the objective and measures. And then maximizing g results in maximizing the objective and performing some motion in measure space. And what we will do is we will perform gradient ascent with respect to this function g. Now the question is, how do we pick these coefficients, right? Because these coefficients will tell us which direction we will move in measure space, and also how far we are going to move in each direction. And one idea would be to sample these coefficients from a multivariate Gaussian. But a better idea is actually to pick the coefficients so to maximize improvement of the arc. So in other words, pick the coefficients so that we will try to fill in as many cells as possible with solutions of as high quality as possible. Yes. Right. So okay. So we have not. That's interesting because we have not explored relationships with the Lagrangian. I think the way I'm thinking of that is the following. We have an objective and measure space. And then what we want to do is we want to perform some motion in that space. And the motion needs to be so that we fill in the measure space, but we also maximize an objective. Now, we don't know what this motion exactly would be. So we need to set up some type of coordinate system to do the motion, but then we need to also define what are the displacements in each direction. And these displacements here are the coefficients. Now, keep in mind, though, that we want to pick the coefficients to maximize a specific objective, which is a quality diversity objective. And we change this objective by changing our current archive, which is discrete. So we have a discrete archive, right? So you can think of that as following, right? You can have a vector gradient field where one point is your current archive and the solution that you have, and then you have the quality diversity objective. And then you want to find some direction that improves the quality diversity objective. But you cannot exactly change the archive. What you can do is you can change the solution point that you are, and that will result also in a change on the archive, and that will move in the direction to the object. And the question is then, how do you find these coefficients? And you cannot solve this analytically because it's the archive is discrete, right? And the quality diversity is over archives that are discrete. So instead, what you do is like we formulate this as an optimization problem. And the way we solve this is through CMAS. So the idea is that we model different search directions as a multivariate Gaussian, where we sample coefficients, and each coefficient results in a motion in a objective measure space. And then we evaluate the solution resulting from that motion with respect to the quality diversity objective. And then we select and rank the best solutions, and then we adapt the step size. And this results in the covariance matrix adaptation map elites via gradient arborescence algorithm, where we have a multivariate Gaussian with sample coefficients. We branch in objective measure space, so we move our solution point in objective measure space. We evaluate the new solutions and update the archive. And then we pick the best direction to ascend and maximize the quality diversity objective, which is the sum of the qualities of all solutions. And then we also update this multivariate Gaussian. So a way to think of that intuitively is the following. Let's imagine that we are in a room and the search space is 3D, right? So we have solutions everywhere in a room. And let's say that we have one objective and one measure. Then the objective measure space will form a plane, right? A 2D plane in the room. And so you can think of that as a sheet on the room. And then within that sheet, we try to find a search direction. We try to find some coefficients so that moving in that direction will maximize the quality diversity objective. And then we will move in that direction, and then we will recompute the objective and measure gradients. And we do this iteratively. So the optimization landscape changes a little bit every time we move, because we compute the objective and measures, and the archive is changing. But we assume that it doesn't move fast enough. So we assume that it moves slowly. And so this is a projection of the gradient arborescence in measure space. So we were able for the first time to completely solve some benchmark domains with CMA Mega. You see how the archive is filled compared to the other baselines. And to come back to our original motivating example in latent space illumination, we try to find images of Elon Musk that are diverse with respect to hair color and eye color. So you see as we go to the left, the eyes become blue. As we go down, the hair becomes red. These are two cherry-picked examples. This is Beyonce. As we go down, she becomes younger. As we go left, her hair becomes longer. These are all examples from a single run of CMA Mega on the latent space of a gun. And another example. And this is Jennifer Lopez. As we go down, she becomes frowning. As we go left, her hair becomes longer. And all these algorithms that I have discussed, we have actually open sourced them. So we have a PyRips library that, and we have also several tutorials. So you can use quality diversity to explore diverse strategies, including how to land a lunar lander like a space shuttle. And one application that I have been very, very excited about since the beginning of my studies has been how we can learn human preferences and adapt to human preferences. So one thing that we have noticed is that even though there may be a very large number of possible action sequences that users may execute during a task, we can actually cluster people based on a few dominant preferences because of similarities between users. And therefore, if we do that, then a robot can very, very quickly infer the preference of a new user and assist the user. And what we found out is that in more complex tasks, there are dominant preferences in multiple resolutions. So for example, in this IKEA assembly task, then we can cluster people people can be clustered based on not only whether they, for example, start by assembling shelves versus assembling boards, but also whether they will connect shelves to boards and how they are going to connect them and so on. And doing this kind of multi-stage clustering analysis leads to much more efficient prediction. And we are now extending this to a much more complex assembly task of a model airplane. So we have a bunch of model airplanes. This is a project funded by NSF NRI, where we have a set of complex of model airplanes that students will assemble with a mobile robot manipulator and a robotic arm. And students only use these model airplanes for experiments and will never fly them around. Wink, wink. And when learning from human demonstrations, parts of these demonstrations may be suboptimal. And so the question then becomes how we can extract useful information from suboptimal demonstrations. And I wanted to close this talk by coming back to the hair combing example. And we have actually been iterating a lot on this example and making more and more robust. And so back then, when things were in person, we did a live demonstration at NeurIPS. And so Nathan has short hair, so the robot will adapt to his hairstyle. But then the other user that has Yura, that has much longer hair, requires a completely different motion of the robot arm. And another application that we have been working is robot-assisted roof bolting. So this is a roof bolter, and the way a roof bolter performs inside the mine is that it drills the ceiling and then places steel bolts on the ceiling to reinforce it so that the ceiling doesn't collapse. And in hair combing, if something goes wrong, then it will hurt a little bit. But this roof bolter here runs on hydraulics. And if something goes wrong, this can result in severe injury or death. So it's a really a safety critical application where robustness and accounting for undesirable behaviors is very important. And so what we have been working in collaboration with the University of Kentucky is how can we remove the human away from the danger zone so that the human can provide some high level goals to the user. And then the user can infer the goals and then the robot can, how the human can provide some high-level goals to the robot, and then the robot can infer these goals and assist the human by performing some manipulation tasks with the roof bolter. And since I started at USC, I also introduced a new robotics class. So we got 5 Kinova arms, and we split the students to groups so that students have the chance to perform a full manipulation and planning pipeline on the actual robot arms. And so last term, it was done everything in simulation, but this fall, we were able to do for the first time all the labs in person. This is the most important slide. So these are all the students that did the work. So Matt Fontaine has been working on quality diversity optimization and latent space illumination, and also scenario generation for human-robot interaction. Sophie Su, Yulun Zhang, and Brian Chanaka have been working on generating diverse scenarios for human-robot coordination, diverse environments. Brian Chanaka has been also leading the development of the PyRips library. Herab Nemlerkar on learning human preferences, Anirudh Spuraning on learning from imperfect demonstrations, Nathan Denler on hair combing, and also Hejia Zhang on the roof bolting project. And I'm very thankful also to all my collaborators. And so I wanted to end this talk with the main takeaway that there are many applications where we want to find a diverse range of solutions that are also high quality. And one of them is scenario generation for human-robot interaction. And we have discussed the quality diversity algorithms that help search efficiently the space of scenarios to find diverse and high quality solutions. But also we have discussed how to integrate these algorithms with generative models to generate diverse content that is also realistic. And with that, I would be happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. Let me introduce the format for the questions. So for people online, you can submit question on Q&A on the bottom of the Zoom. I actually forgot to introduce our panelists. Maria Elizabeth Tsai and Lars Lederman, who's here. So people here could ask questions, but I'll refer that to the panelist. Yeah.
Thank you. That was a very interesting talk. So I have 2 questions about the first experiment that you showed with the human, like operating the robot to grasp something. So my question is on how did you measure the variation in the human operation? Because so one of the axes was on variation, right? And then the other question is, so I remember on the bottom of that plot where the distance was 0, there were actually no failure. So why was that the case?
Right. Yeah, these are great points, and maybe I can resume the slides. Maybe I'll give an explanation, and then if that's not enough, I'll show you the slides. So the first one is how we measure variation. We had 2 measures. One is the total amount of noise injected. So it was the sum of it was the sum of the squares of the deviations from the optimal path in a set of discrete waypoints. A second way that we did that is we assume that there is some observer that is rational or noisy rational with respect to some cost function, which is a minimized distance to the path. And then we did an inference on the rationality of the user, assuming a rational observer. So based on the trajectory of the user, we did the inference of the rationality, right, with Bayes' rule, assuming a noisy rational model, basically a model of Boltzmann rationality. So these were the two ways we did it. For the second question, yes, if the distance is 0, that was an artifact of simulation. So what happened is we didn't implement collision detection. So when we sampled objects, sometimes the two objects would overlap, and then that would be considered as a success case because the robot would always reach the object, but that's like a case that would not exist in the real world, but it was more like a simulation artifact. So below a threshold, we just ignored any solutions generated by the simulator just because they were not physically plausible.
This is kind of a follow-up on the previous question. And I'm kind of curious to know how difficult in your experience is it to model humans in these settings where you're trying to simulate for human-robot interaction tasks.
Right.
It's quite, I was quite surprised that the results that you found in simulation did actually transfer to real users afterwards. And is that something that you see frequently? Is it hard to achieve models that are good enough, have high enough fidelity to achieve this? That's kind of broadly my question.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, that's clearly something that we have been thinking quite a bit. And one thing I should say is that there has been ongoing effort from other groups, like there is the assistive gym in Georgia Tech, right, where from people trying to build more and more high fidelity simulators. And this, of course, will help. I think one thing to say is that for me, when I think of simulating humans, I don't necessarily right now, I'm not considering simulating physical human skeletons and human motions. I'm more thinking of simulating what are the effects of human actions in the real world. And so there are different ways of like granularity, right? So you can just simulate how humans affect the real world, or you can simulate humans with some some work that Stefania Pellegrinelli has done with like rough bounding boxes, right, and do collision detection, or you can go to very high fidelity models. So I'm using these lower fidelity models just because even with these models, you can be arbitrarily complex in how you model human decision making. One thing that we have observed, though, is that you don't need to actually have very accurate human models to find interesting scenarios. So both in the shared autonomy, the way we did it is we simulated human inputs, and then it was basically me observing what happened in simulation and roughly replicating the real world and observing like the same outcome. Also in the overcooked game domain, we had the simulated human was just a rule-based model that clearly was not by any stretch of the imagination identical to how actual users behaved, but still the environments that were hard in simulation were also hard in the real world. So I think to answer your question, I think that we are not going to see, and we are not seeing an exact match of absolute values of like the objective and measures when moving from simulation to the real world, but we see a strong correlation of what is hard in simulation to what is actually proves hard in the real world. And of course, as these human simulators become better and better, right, that's also going to bridge the gap.
Yeah, so there's a question by Rosina. In your formulation, time does not appear. How will you deal with unexpected safety dangerous situation to protect the human?
Yeah, so the way we simulate scenarios is we have a set of parameters, of scenario parameters, and these parameters define the configuration of the environment and also configuration of the human model. And then the idea is that then you have some model of dynamics, right? These are dynamics on how the environment is going to change. These are dynamics of how the human will act. These are also dynamics on how the robot controller is going to behave. And then we simulate this forward, and then we evaluate the outcome. So in a sense, we can, if we want to capture some information that has to do with how the scenario evolves over time, that can actually be a scenario parameter, right? It could be a scenario parameter of, for example, how fast the robot is going to move, or what's the probability of a specific outcome, and how this probability changes over time. So if we assume if there is some good parametric model of simulating, I think that also relates to your question, right? The previous question, that if there is some good parametric model of simulating, like for example, for autonomous cars, right? If there is some good parametric model of simulating trajectories of autonomous cars, of trajectories of human drivers, or changes, stochastic changes in the environment, that is something that we can include a scenario parameter and then potentially evaluate it. Now, the next question becomes how accurate is going to be this trajectory generation, right? And how accurate that can be this simulation of actual human inputs. In a sense, that's orthogonal to the scenario search question. It's more related to being able to build, but it's also something that I'm very interested in. And it's something that has to do more with how can we build accurate models that are that can capture well-timed varying processes. Yeah.
The optimization with respect to the latent variables, is the rest of this is happening after the network is trained and frozen,
Yes,
right?
Right.
I see. And tell me also at the very beginning, how did you what is the landscape of multi-objective optimization? Like when is covariance CMA used?
Right. So let me. Sorry for skipping. So I can tell you the following, right? So then, with respect to single objective and multi-objective, right? So in single objective, you have this unique objective that you want the global optimum. Multi-objective, you search for a Pareto front. In quality diversity, you want to maximize this objective, and you want also to find a solution for every output combination of measure functions. So this is your goal, right? Your goal is to fill in the archive of solutions. Now, then when it comes to how we can combine CMAS with, let's say, map elites. So the way map elites works is it takes the solutions and applies some perturbation isotropic, which means that like it assumes every direction is equally promising. It doesn't account for the quality diversity objective. It doesn't account for the fact that we want to fill in the archive with solutions of as high quality as possible. It only tries to just generate new solutions. And the reason for that is that it's designed to run for a very long amount of time. So instead, the question that we are asking is, can we instead generate solutions that approximate some gradient of the objective, which is to fill in as many cells as possible with solutions as high quality as possible, with respect to the archive. So if we have a current archive and we have an objective, can we, because this is an objective over archives, right? It's an objective over discrete different archives, and we want to find the best archive with respect to that objective. So if we have a current archive, what is the best? Can we take a gradient of the objective with respect to the archive? But the archive is discrete, so we cannot take an analytic gradient. So the way we approximate that is we try to find a small perturbation on the archive, a small change on the archive that maximizes improvement of the objective. Now, how can we change the archive? Either by adding a new solution or replacing a new solution. So we search for the solution that we will either add or replace that will maximize improvement of the quality diversity objective with respect to the current archive. And that's like a gradient ascent, a steepest ascent of the QD objective. And we do this iteratively. And we do this with CMAES because CMAES, we also have some nice adaptation rules. So if we take several successive steps with CMAES, then, so the way CMAES works is it has some cumulative step size adaptation properties where you take the expected displacement if you're doing a random walk, and then you compare that with how much you have moved based on previous steps, the evolution path. And then if you're moving faster than that, then this means that you are actually taking a lot of successful steps, and therefore you should increase the step size and go faster. If you're moving slower than that, this means that you are like bouncing around too much, so you should reduce your step size. And so that's how like CMAES actually helps. It helps both by selecting and ranking solutions based on how they improve the quality diversity objective, but also by adapting that step size. And that's helpful because every time the archive changes, so the objective changes, but it changes a little bit. It changes slowly.
So how does the speed of the algorithm scale with the number of metrics you have?
Yeah, that's also a great point, right? So clearly, you want to fill in a measure space. So as you increase the number of measures, then the number of cells that you want to fill increases exponentially. However, what is often the case is that not every part of measure space is equally important. And so what you can do, well, it's a function not just with the number of measures, but also with the resolution of the measure space. And so what you can do is you can change the resolution so that the resolution becomes finer in parts of measure space that you want to fill in, and less fine in the parts that you don't care about. And what is interesting is that if your objective correlates with the measures, then there are algorithms that will do this automatically for you. So there is a map-elite with sliding boundaries, and it will change the resolution of measure space based on how much this correlates with improvement of the objective. But clearly, you know, I mean, so this can extend. Two measures help a lot for visualization. The original map-elite paper was 6 measures, so it was a 60 measure space. But I think, you know, playing with a resolution is something that you can do to counterbalance the increase in the number of solutions that you need to have. Yeah.
Follow up, like this is like scalability in terms of the measure space, right? How much is the parameter space? How much does it play a role in the scalability? Because I guess, especially if we're talking about dynamical models, maybe for human driving and so on, that might get quite large as well.
Yeah. So quality diversity algorithms can actually scale, are actually very scalable to the size of the parameter space. So they have been used for like hundreds of thousands of parameters very efficiently. Also, map-elite has been really good in terms of like discrete spaces, but the CMA-ME algorithm that we have described has been very, very effective in continuous spaces as well. So I think, so searching for a very high dimensional search space, I think that's something that the CMA-ME is actually, right. The other thing is the following. If you have access to gradient information, then you are no longer searching on the high dimensional search space, but you are now moving and searching to a much lower dimensional objective measure space, right? So because then you are doing a motion in objective measure space. And then it doesn't really matter, right? The size of the search space, of the parameter space, because now you have reduced the search to a much lower dimensional objective measure space. So that's if you have access to the exact gradient information. I would say the only concern if you have a very high dimensional parameter space and you are using CMA-ME is that you need to do eigenvalue decomposition of the covariance metrics, and that has complexity, well, O(n) cubed, but you can do some approximations and bring it out to O(n) squared. But I think that, and that's in every evaluation, right? In every iteration. And that's the only bottleneck, that because you have to essentially invert the covariance metrics, then that's a limit with respect to how, like if you go to millions of parameters, that becomes a limit in performance. But again, if you have exact gradients, then you are just limiting the search to a much lower dimensional objective measure space.
So this is a question that's motivated by your hair combing experiments, which are very cool. I was wondering, in those cases, we do have in robotics ways to kind of handle errors in perception and so on, just through compliance, for example, right? And was this kind of part of the strategy that you were already considering in these cases? Did the system, when you were analyzing the failures, were these failures in spite of the inherent compliance of the mechanical interaction, or were they primarily sensing failures? Or yeah.
Right. So with respect to the hair combing system, there are different types of failures, right? So there can be perception failures. That's something that we have not yet explored. Simulating perception, right? In simulation, there can be failures, the compliance failures. So right now, we are actually we have implemented torque control, right, to be able to account for forces applied, because that's also important in hair combing. So for me, I think the main motivation behind searching for failures is that we don't necessarily want to tie this up to a specific type of failure, but we want to be able to have some parameters and then be able to simulate some like system and then see how it interacts with a user and then evaluate that system. So right, but then no, I think that's a great point. That I think when accounting for specific scenarios, there are always, I mean, you can always improve the system and make the system perform better. And I think what we are actually getting at is that you can what we're actually getting at is that you can generate scenarios and then find some failures and then improve the system and test it again, right? And one way to improve the system in physical human-robot interaction is with with compliance and force control. That's something that we have been working on. Better perception, better human models, modeling better user behaviors. So I see this as an iterative loop where you try to find some failures and then you do a user study and then you test these behaviors and then you improve the system. Yeah.